Welcome everyone to Women and Gender Minorities in STEM, a monthly virtual speaker series brought to you by the Ecotarium. My name is Paige Curtis. My pronouns are she, her. I'm so excited to introduce our June 2021 speaker, Sara Gutierrez.
Welcome to Sara Gutierrez, our speaker for June for Women and Gender Minorities in STEM, brought to you by the Ecotarium. Sara is a planetary geophysicist, a 500 Women Scientist Fellow, a science communicator, and an artist. Welcome, Sara. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Paige. I'm so excited to share what I can with everyone.
I can't wait to jump into the millions of questions that I have for you. But first, if you could share with us your preferred pronouns and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. My pronouns are she, they. Thank you for asking. And currently, I just finished my third year of graduate school at Case Western Reserve University, which is in Cleveland, Ohio. I am working with Dr. Steve Hauk in getting a PhD in planetary geophysics. So my work right now is basically I use computers to figure out about the insides of planets and how they change over time, and I'll talk about that more later. But I received my my undergraduate degree in 2017 from UC Berkeley. I double majored in geophysics and astrophysics, and before that, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and before that, I was born in Bogota, Colombia. So I have roots in lots of different places and people I love and communities in lots of different places, and also lots of cool rocks in different places that I've been able to enjoy and has definitely shaped who I am and how I approach science today. So yeah.
Amazing. I just can't wait to dive into all of this. I'm just like bubbling with questions. But our first question that we always ask here on Women and Gender Minorities in STEM is, will you please share with us a funny field, lab, industry, anything of that nature story with us?
Yeah, I thought of one that is one of my favorite memories, particular to myself and my family. And so my parents are actually both geoscientists as well, and so is my brother. I come from a family of geoscientists. Anyways, that's like our shared love. And so this is not from maybe like this is from our vacation, but it was kind of driven by science and geology. And we were in Hawaii on the Big Island, which is an incredible place geologically to visit. Just amazing. Highly recommend to everyone. And even if you have no knowledge of geology or anything, just like even just learning a little bit will really like enrich your time there. So anyways, and for legal purposes, this story is a joke and did not happen. But because I hope many people know that geologists in some ways are a bit anti-authoritarian, because the rule like you don't take rocks from parks. And yes, do not do that, everyone. I don't do that now. I do not condone that. But at the same time, reality, many geoscientists do. They're like, oh my God, I just want this little memento of this amazing trip and these things I saw, that it's just not the same to look at it in a book. So, but there's this beach in Hawaii called the Green Sand Beach on the Big Island. And it is olivine that can only exist in large quantities under very specific conditions, which is why we don't have green sands all over the world. I think there's a couple other places in Galapagos and somewhere in Southeast Asia, if I'm getting that correct. But it is amazing. To get there, you have to hike an hour from the nearest road, or you can pay some locals, which you're not supposed to do. But it's kind of like this very open rule, and so it's really hard to get there. It's one of the few places in the world, and Hawaii is very strict about what you can take, as they should be. My parents were like, oh my gosh, we have to add this to our sand collection. This is like amazing. And like I get it now, but as a kid I was like, you guys are so weird. Like, no, this is like, please, can we just be normal like everyone else and come and enjoy? But they were adamant, like, no, like this needs to be documented. We just want like a little bit forever and ever that we can take with us, and no one can ever, and always remind us of these amazing memories. So there aren't many ways to transport sand low key in an area. So what we were convinced to do, me and my brother, and it ended up happening naturally. The waves were so intense, it's just sand getting into our swimsuits. And then, and it was like, oh, well, actually, no one will see us scooping anything into our bag. We're not technically actively trying to take anything, it's like, it's just happening from us being here, from sitting in the sand. And so as I was in the midst of like normally just like cleaning my swimsuit before we do the hour hike back, my mom was like, no, keep that. That's it. That's perfect. That's how we'll do this. So I walked an hour all the way back, and I'm pretty sure my brother did too, but I think with his shorts, it's a bit harder to keep sand in there. And then we're at the car, and I'm like, I'm a teenager. I'm not a kid, but still like no reservations. And then it's like, okay, Sarah, you're our daughter, like scrape out the sand in your swimsuit and put it in this little bottle after this like itchy, uncomfortable walk all the way back. And sometimes you do take a little bit of dirt when you go somewhere with you. And this time it just happened to be something highly desired by my parents, who are geoscientists, and it was just in my swimsuit. So that is the type of thing that I'm sure maybe I'll make my kids do someday for me and be like, well, that's too uncomfortable for me, but you can walk with a bunch of sand in all of your clothes, so please do that. That was a long-winded story, but I just hope you can imagine the discomfort and also the annoyance of being a teenager, but then getting it all for the sake of
sharing your
science.
story with us, Sarah. That was hilarious. So my first non-funny story question is, what is planetary geophysics and why is it important?
When I'm describing geophysics, is using physics to understand rocks and more commonly the Earth. And so the most accessible thing that people might be familiar with is like seismology, understanding earthquakes, when are we going to get them, if we can predict that, volcanology, I miss fluids. I mean, lots of stuff like the inner parts of planets, how rocks formed. There's a lot there. And so planetary is basically using all of those tools as much as we can that we've developed here for the Earth, but for other planets or other moons or even any other sort of rocky body in the solar system. So asteroids as well. And yeah, specifically, that can look like lots of different things like gravity measurements, or you can use that by just dynamics. You can learn about planets' insides and their mass with inertia measurements and all sort of that type of thing. But for me, I'm not working directly with analyzing data. What I'm using are models, because we're basically trying to find out what happened in a place that we can't go to. We use models to try to figure out what's happening in the inside of Earth right now. And so now we're doing that, but like time traveling backwards. So everything is connected. You couldn't just do modeling by itself. You can't just do experiments and by itself. Like, everyone is reading each other's work. And so basically I am using what other scientists who do different types of research, their findings, to guide my basic assumptions to how rocks would behave at certain pressures and temperatures. So for example, Earth has plate tectonics and no other planet does. And Venus is the same size as Earth, basically. So what is that? What exactly, if things behave similarly, you would expect them to, if they have the same, like they following the same laws of physics, then what were the initial conditions that were different that caused the end product to differ from each other? So what are measurements today that are guiding my work? So what I'm trying to figure out is, why is the moon the way it is today? Does it have an inner core? How big is that inner core? And what is the composition of that core? Also, because the way that magnetic fields are created are often determined by the core history, core growth of a planet. That is really of importance to magnetic fields. So there's no current magnetic field on the moon, but with the Apollo samples, again, another type of science that even though we got these samples decades ago, they're still looking at them and reanalyzing them. They can see evidence of something called paleomagnetism. So magnetism isn't there anymore, but it used to be. And from that, they're able to track the magnetic field. And so my work is trying to say, okay, what was happening in the core even though we can't be in the core and we can't go back in time. But what's our best guess that could match up with the magnetic field history and with the possible structures of what we believe today from gravity measurements, and also we do have seismic data from the Apollo missions of the moon. It's like a lot of puzzles. That has been my learning experience, what helps me kind of like understand all of my work.
You almost have to be like a Sherlock Holmes type of
Yeah.
person. Like you're looking at all of these little things that are kind of connected, and you have to figure out how they fit together to answer these questions.
Yeah, and it's tough. And what I've learned recently, and I was asked about thoroughly in my qualifying exams, is what happens when different scientists that are looking at different pieces of the puzzle come up with a result that are in direct disagreement with each other. You're not only maybe disagreeing with people, for myself, with other modelers, and they're like, well, I did it this way and I think this is better, or I made these assumptions and that's why this would be correct and yours isn't. But even with other people that are looking at it in a totally different way, you could be in disagreement with them. So it's really complex, but there's a lot of beauty in it.
It sounds like there's a lot of like cross collaboration as well.
Yeah.
And is that one of those things that the collaboration happens like at the end, or is it constant? Are you constantly like checking in with all of these other scientists studying the same materials or along the same lines or any of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it definitely depends on the groups, but in my group, we have a couple of folks, including myself, that are all in the computer modeling, and then we have experimentalists that are more mineral experts in like material physics, it seems. And so they're very, I don't know if it's like we're collaborating in the way that I'm going to ask them to, how do you code this? But more of like these sanity checks. I'm like, oh wait, can I say this about this type of material? Well, is my thermodynamic intuition correct? And then some helpful sanity checks, and that's useful.
So what drew you specifically to planetary geophysics?
Yeah, that is a great question. So growing up in Houston, Texas, I went to a lot of NASA camps growing up, and that struck me as a child. Like I was deeply impacted. Learning about space was very comforting and almost like this escapist experience. I think like when kids are very much into fantasy or magic, science fiction, which I was, it is like it's this comfort of like what things could be. I had like space dioramas in my room and like all my project. I remember I did a project on Buzz Aldrin, and in high school I really wanted to be an astronaut. I got the Russian Rosetta Stone. I considered applying to the Air Force, ultimately did not for lots of other reasons, but I was just like, this is the coolest thing that could possibly ever exist. And then I just never stopped thinking that. That being said, growing up, I definitely had a lot of resistance to geoscience. Like I thought space was so cool, but I was just like, but like not rocks. Like ew. Like mom and dad, please. Like I was so embarrassed all the time. Like when we finally were moving into a house, and they're like, "Ooh, what type of table granite is this?" And like looking at the tabletop in the kitchen, and I'm just like, oh my God. And when I was older in high school, and probably Hawaii was a part of that, now that I think of it, they were like, we're going on a road trip all the way from Houston up through Seattle, back through Montana, and we're visiting as many national parks as we can. And that changed my life, and that changed the game, because to see mountainous landscapes, to see really cool just like features formed by like weird erosional patterns, like that is such an impressive thing, and is something that speaks to like so many, like anyone can look at something at a big rock and be like, why is that like that? That's so weird. Like, shouldn't it have fallen over? Like, I've never seen anything like that before. And so seeing that in like 8 different contexts across the country in a couple of weeks definitely was like, okay, I get it now. You won. I couldn't, this whole time, my whole life, I made fun of you, and I drank the Kool-Aid, whatever. I'm in. And so I went to undergrad at Berkeley, and then even before classes started, I was like, okay, I'm going to do geophysics as like my career, and then for fun, I'll do physics, because I think I had watched a lot of like Big Bang Theory growing up or something, and I was like, they're so smart, I want to do that, whatever. And then before classes even started, I attended a seminar in the astronomy department, and I was like, wait, I know astronomy, like I know this, and it just like took me back to when I was a kid, being like, oh my god, this is so cool, watching YouTube videos and crying and being like, we're so small, it's all meaningless. And I was just like, oh my god, people do this for a career. And then that changed everything. And I was like, okay, now astronomy is like my fun thing. And then it was just like all very like just building off of each other. And then in my first class of my first semester, I learned about planetary geoscience.
I mean, it just seems like it almost seems like one of those, a perfect storm where you have all of these different kind of surface levels seem like very different, unrelated interests. And then you were just like almost in the right place at the right time to hear the right person say the right thing.
Yeah.
To realize like, oh, these can all like be compatible and be collaborative with each other, which is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it is, all that being said, still like, I can't overstate the incredible privilege, not just like in the obvious ways, but of just like exposure to geoscience and to science in general that was given to me by both of my parents doing that, which for them, science was kind of like this very clear opportunity for class mobility. They weren't like, oh, I'm in love with rocks. They're like, oh, I need a job that will sustain me and my different family members. For me, it's definitely much more of a romantic experience.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to another question that I have, and it's kind of the melding of a couple of different questions. You spoke to your parents being in the geosciences, and so like as you said, you had this great in your face kind of representation of yourself, you're their progeny, and yourself in this field, and you now are yourself a face of representation. You were featured in 500 Queer Scientists. You're a 500 Women Scientists Fellow. And I'm curious, I'd love to hear about those two groups and what they're doing. And also, what do you think the importance of that representation is to young people specifically, but also just in general for the world, having that representation really out there and accessible?
So specifically just in response to 500 Queer Scientists, for a long time, this was a lesson I learned over time and not easily, but for a very long time, I deeply compartmentalized many aspects of myself. It was who I was as a scientist and then everything else in my life, basically. And so many things that I pride myself in, and like my art and my love of community and my queerness and like the freeness that in which I don't identify with gender in particular ways, and ways that I just like move in a very specific way that is very unique and maybe different from a lot of folks. Not to mention my personal family history and maybe like assumptions people will make about me when they meet me and all of that. And so for a long time, it was just easier to not even offer another version of myself, but just offer nothing. And to not be yourself over a long period of time at work, which is where you're at for a lot of your life and with your colleagues, it's slowly dehumanizing. And so in the first, I will say that the 500 Queer Scientists was something that for a lot of people imagine is like not a big deal, and they've been out for a very long time to their colleagues and their professional selves. But for me, it was kind of just like this step to myself of saying like, this is who I am. And like, I am a scientist and I'm a queer person and I am Colombian and I'm a political organizer and all these things. And because at the root of it, they're all, to myself, they all inform each other and are attached. But when I would speak or go to the office, or just like what the lack of information that I would offer, like literally for years, when people would just ask me like, how are you? I would just give nothing, no personal information, and had these walls up. And that is a response to, understandably, a lot of history of difference in the academy not being welcome, not being met with support, acceptance, like, to say the least, not to mention a lot worse things. And so, but something I learned recently was safety is not walls, safety is connection. And I'll say it again for myself. Like, I am not safe. Nobody is safe by hiding who they are, maybe in a science or political. It creates a short-term safety, but it's a true safety would be knowing you're accepted and not being afraid to say, oh yes, my girlfriend or something, to my boss or something, and then just going on with my life and talking about science for the rest of the day. That, and it's tricky because how do you can't do that with everyone, right? There are reasons why we want to put walls up. There are reasons why I want to put walls up online, of like not being out, of not talking about my personal beliefs and certain things. But when I start to share more, when even personally and online and all those things, of just being like, this is who I am, not withholding the shame, and then meeting other people who are both, one, share those beliefs, are similar to myself, but also people who maybe aren't, but will still accept me, and still understand and support in any way they can. That is true safety. There are going to be lots of people who are maybe similar to me in some ways, but different in others. And that is important to respect and understand as well. And so I do respect, and I think people should always be mindful that there are people of color, women of color, queer people, scientists, who are not political organizers, who are not the go-to, don't really want to talk about a lot of, things that aren't science, and like, that's their right, because they can do whatever they want. And so 500 women scientists has been, and the reality is that unfortunately a lot of times people don't have a choice. They just have to speak or be the spokesperson, and they're made to, and that's a lot of pressure within itself. But as time goes on, hopefully there's more options where you can kind of just do what you want, what calls and is more your passion, sincerely. And so 500 women scientists is a place where I've been able to really connect with other women of color scientists, especially, who are interested in like community science, in almost like the social justice politics aspects of science. And so it's a really special avenue that, even though just in this year, and I've done so many things before, is a totally new experience to be in this space. And so I'm really excited to learn from my colleagues and like fellows as well.
Well, that's a perfect segue question, because community science is something that you've spoken about in a couple of different areas, and I know it's something that you're really passionate about. And I'm curious, can you tell us what is community science? And I'd love to hear about the project that you're working on with 500 women scientists, the geoscience for Youth project.
Yes. Okay. So I think community science, if you ask that question to different people, it's going to be different answers. To me, community science is science that is not closed off specifically to a group of people because of what degrees they have, what they do for a living. Like, you don't have to be a scientist, have that title to do science because of their age, to not think that children can be scientists, elderly people can think like scientists. Community science can also look like science driven by a community's needs. That interest driving scientists, collaborating with scientists to learn more about what's going on. And then lastly, what comes to mind is just like community science is in its most like casual sense. And when I think of like, and I know I'll talk about this later on, but just like people questioning things together. Obviously, I had my mother as an example of a scientist my entire life, but as I've gotten older, it has really challenged me to expand that definition of a scientist to other women in my family who never went to college, who never maybe didn't graduate high school, but who can tell me about what birds come at what time of year, who can ask me, like prompt me to be like, how many different types of trees can you see on our farm in Colombia, things like that. Or when I see, when I have a family member who's showing me their rock collection and, their butterfly collection, like that is science, like that curiosity, that documentation, that observation. My family of 12 people extended with young kids and elders going for a hike on the mountain and like talking about the grass and talking about the animals. That is science. It's not so, like, and there is a cultural and familial love aspect there that is so special. Um, and gonna make it very different than when I go out into a field with a bunch of geologists who maybe just met each other in the last year and we're talking about rocks, but there's still so many similarities that I see in that. I'll lead that into Just Science for Youth, which is a project that I got funded through by 500 Women Scientists, which I'm so excited to talk about and to do and to enact. And I think this is the product of a lot of internal work in learning within myself. So basically, Just Science for Youth, just as in it's just science, but also just as in justice, um, yeah, is a political education project working with migrant teenagers here in Cleveland, Ohio, to basically learn and work with them about the politics of science, asking questions like, what drives the production of science? How is science done in our society? Who benefits? Who is hurt? And those questions historically. And then also, how can science be used in a liberatory context? For me, that's such a big question, but like, how can science be used to reduce the suffering of as most people as possible? I'm going to have a lot of my colleagues, scientists, come and just talk to them about their science, just to know, just this could be your jam. Like, I just want you to learn it. But I'm also having my friends who are poets or political organizers or illustrators come in and talk to them about different ways of art and just like culture and expressing themselves, which will come in later. So the first half is kind of just like this general overview. We'll be talking about indigenous science. We'll be talking about how medicine has been used to hurt a lot of populations. And then the second half will be each of them developing their own projects of something they've learned, maybe even something we haven't talked about. I just want them to really dig deep into something that they're passionate about. And then I want them to become like, I think it's so cool for teenagers to like feel like they're the authority of knowledge, And so they will develop their own project. And then ultimately, the goal is really just like communal education. I want them, they're each going to have a final report and presentation and lots to share and share that within their families. In the fall, so that's like the summer piece. I'll wrap this up. But in the fall, we'll be connecting them with teenagers in Colombia. And I have many family members who are public school teachers in Colombia, and I've been to these schools several times, and it's like just something I've done that has always been important to me, talking about science, English, all sorts of things. And so I want them to do a knowledge exchange, a culture exchange, and like to really learn. And like, I think international solidarity is so important. And people in Colombia themselves, many are the site of displacement because of conflict, even just internally. And so I want, I think that could be very powerful for teens to think about, to meet people on other sides of the world who have similarities in ways that maybe they didn't expect, but also differences, and learn from them. And then their final project together will be, so in the spring, after the summer, after the winter, will be the result, a collaborative zine, multilingual, responding. I will check in with you, Paige. When it's done, I'll send you a copy, which will be like just responding to everything they've learned. This is deeply inspired by my work with Science for the People, that does like a magazine featuring all sorts of topics and like kind of more extensive articles. But I want them, they can write poetry, they can write comics, they can write like a formal article if they want and be like, did you know this is what's happening, blah, 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 in different languages. I want them to be informal and express themselves. Like if they're angry, and anger is not something you will find in a scientific journal, understandably, but I want them to feel that. Maybe they drive that. Maybe they're angry that previous generations created the climate crisis that we're in right now, and I want them to express that and like put that out and educate for themselves as a memento and with the people around them. So that is, and there's so many other different factors, and I kind of maybe delved into some things too much in detail, but I think what I'm looking forward to is learning from them as well. This is like, I don't know everything. I'm a geoscientist. Like, I don't know biology. I don't know environmental science, and I don't claim to be an expert. So I'm mostly there to steward and help them and guide them and get them the resources that they want. I'm really excited to learn so much myself. And then also, I want them to just like, I've worked with youth for many years now. I think it's like a very important line of work on so many levels, and even scientifically, it's just like a different way of thought that a lot of young people have, and so yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
That's I just like astounding and a huge undertaking it sounds like, but really really incredible, and I can't wait to see, like I'm so excited to see how I'm definitely going to be keeping up and keeping
Yeah,
track.
I think something I would just like briefly like to mention, and which I think is obvious from the way that I conduct myself and the work that I do, is that when you're a scientist, you're not just a scientist, right? And if I hope if any young person sees this, it's like if you want to be a scientist, if you want to do science, that is a piece of who you are, a piece of what you do, but it's not the only thing you do. And so you can still do so many other things, and I do lots of different things, and I do think it's important to be thinking about your community and the people around you. And a lot of times, because I don't think science is inherently this way, but because of the way science is set up, you can get into these insular places, and probably less than 10 people are thinking about what I'm thinking about in the whole world. And so that's not very much just like being with my people. And so that is like a constant reminder, and why community science and why political organizing centered around the politics of science like brings me to that. And yeah, so that's just like something I'm thinking about.
Yeah. What would you say, what is your favorite thing about your career?
Oh my gosh. um I'll do two parts. My favorite feeling that is rare um is this feeling of excitement, of like pure excitement when I like come up with a new idea or something to try, or like that it's because when I feel very creative, basically, to do something that no one has done before, like that's kind of the point. And to um I think that is a lot of times in industry, you're not really supposed to do things that no one has done before. That's not the point. You're supposed to do the things that have been done before and do them better or faster and more efficient. But it's definitely like a very special mindset to be like, oh my gosh, I got this. And I think this is really cool, and something kind of just like for the sake of it being like this knowledge. And so fortunately that is rare. It seems, compared just like in the day to day, because you have to get a lot of work done before you get that kind of like special moment of like, oh my god, yes, like that is so cool. Of like creating just like the different facets of that, of when that comes to life. And then my favorite thing outside of that is honestly just like connecting with people, because and I think this is really why I studied like planetary geoscience. I wanted to do something that I could talk to my grandma about. I had a lot of friends in undergrad in physics who were doing maybe like theoretical particle, blah, 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 all of that, like high energy. I don't know. I can't even talk about it because, like, I don't know. And it's things that are hard to describe. But for my grandma, I can be like, okay, a volcano? Imagine that on another planet. And then she's like, okay. And that excitement, that kind of like mutual respect and like it opens up something that we didn't know that the other person also cared about, that we probably wouldn't have been talking in our day to day. And so having that with all sorts of people all the time is so special and really, really awesome. And I'm really grateful for that.
I love that. I love that. And I just would comment that it seems very in line with your passion and tendency towards community science as well. Yeah, I mean, you're consistent.
Yeah, that's true. I do have a brand.
Which is awesome. I mean, I think that when you're passionate about something, you're able to talk to people about it. That's what that's what it sparks passion in others, and so that's awesome. So on the flip side of things, what's your least favorite thing, or maybe the most monotonous, or like the most annoying thing about your job?
Yeah. My least favorite thing is my least favorite thing about this job, not just for me specifically, but for all of my colleagues, is the lack of funding. Um, and I know that could be a go-to answer that many people will say, but I think to me, just personally with my politics, it connects to seeing the psychological effects it has on a lot of very wonderful thinkers and creative people of either eventually getting kicked out of their field or every couple of years having to constantly justify why they should be able to do the work that they want to do, that brings them joy, that makes them happy, that they're best at. And I'll just say, when I think about how much money is being spent, a lot of times people will say, why are we sending people to the moon? Why are we, not that we're doing that, even though we might in the next couple of years, but like, why are we sending these robots or satellites out there? And it's like, why are we funding the military to the extent that we're funding? Like, NASA gets such little money compared. That is frustrating for me, because it makes it very, very hard to do something that I think shouldn't be so difficult to do. And that is such a general statement that I would extrapolate to the arts and all sorts of things that don't receive a lot of funding that I think should, because they enrich our human experience.
What advice would you give to anyone, young person, middle-aged person, older person, anyone who's interested in this field and maybe wants to learn more, or maybe wants to think about a career?
Totally. So I will share a lot of the advice that was given to me. So this is not original info. I didn't come up with any of these answers, but you to be a scientist, and despite everything I have said, you do need higher education. And so I would go to whatever college you can. They're going to have those classes. Community college is a great resource if you're older and don't maybe want to pay a lot of money, or you're younger, really look into those scholarships. Like, get your degree, and when you're getting your degree, your bachelor's, try to get into research, because classes are very, very hard, and it is not a place often. I mean, I guess that depends on your pedagogy of the pedagogy of your institution, a place where you can really be creative, which is, I think, my favorite part about research. And so research that and honestly, and just to figure out if you actually do want to do this. And so I had a really great research experiences as an undergrad, that even when classes were very hard, I was like, no, but I know I can be a scientist. Like, I love doing science and I'm good at it. This problem set is just really, really hard, and I'm stressed out. And so doing that, getting those experiences, meeting as many people as you can, I guess another piece of, and while you're doing that, kind of like, everyone is very worried if they're smart enough to do something. So it is not about, I'm at this point in my life, it's like, I don't really value intelligence. I'm over it. Like, just people are working hard, and, and not to mention they have a lot of maybe resources behind them that you don't even know about. It's like propping them up. So build strong community, and like, ask for help, work hard, and then if you want to go further, apply to graduate school. There's a lot of information on that, and then it's just like, once you have your PhD, which I'm not even at that point yet. I'm still working on it. You'll be applying, maybe working in a research lab as a professor, also, and depending on the type of science, maybe industry. Yeah.
Great advice.
Thanks.
And our last but not least question, any final words, thoughts, wisdom that you have for us?
Totally. Well, I will say that if anything I resonated or alluded to slightly about talking about the overlap of science and politics, I would definitely plug the organization Science for the People. It started in the 60s as tied with the anti-war movement, and it has really, I think, also during undergrad, I had my activism or whatever was kind of separate from my science, and it was these two things that I thought, oh, they're just different parts of my lives, they'll never overlap. But it like changed my life to realize science, and further than science, whatever you do is political. And so I think it's really helpful when you're taking classes, when you're learning about a new field of science, to ask, how is this knowledge found? How do I even have access to this knowledge? Who doesn't have access to this knowledge? And like, why is this knowledge being sought? Like, why is this science being done? And what are like the bigger societal implications of that?
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much for being our June interviewee. This has been amazing. I could keep asking you questions for hours, but I won't. Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to talk with you again for our live Q&A session.
We hope to see you all at our live Q&A session with Sarah on Thursday, June 24th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Registration can be found at ecotarium.org.